Today, I'm in Milford, Ohio. Let's check it out. This is part 3 on my series on Milford, Ohio. Check out the others for the full story. These were the first townhomes in Milford. The section behind me went up in 1840, and the two on the right came much later in 1868. So this isn't one row built all at once. It's a single home that grew into a row across nearly 30 years, as the town around it grew too. And where they sit means something. The corner just down the street, Elm and Water, was the beating heart of early Milford's industry. The town's first tannery stood right there, and a shoe shop beside it. Both of them later bought up by John Kugler when he came to town. There was a distillery on this corner too, and Kugler bought that as well. So within a stone's throw of these front doors, you had hides being tanned, shoes being made, and grain being turned into whiskey. A working, smelly, noisy little industrial quarter, humming 6 days a week, which is exactly why the townhomes appear here and why they matter. For most of Milford's early life, this was a town of detached buildings, first log, then frame and brick and stone, each one standing on its own lot with room around it. That's how a farming settlement is built. But a townhome is a different animal. Attached housing, walls shared between families, packed in close. You only build that way when you need to put a lot of working people near their work. Row houses mean density. They mean a wage-earning population that clocks in at the tannery and the distillery down the street. They mean a town that's starting to urbanize, to become a place where people live to work, not just to farm. So these modest attached homes are actually a marker of something bigger, the moment Milford began turning from a county settlement into a small industrial town. This home at 114 Main Street was built all the way back in 1815, and it carries the name of Mathias Kugler, the father of John Kugler. Now that's a little puzzling at first because according to the census and the historical record, Mathias never actually moved to Milford. He stayed up in New Germany, present-day Camp Dennison, even after his son John relocated down here in 1828. In fact, in 1830, the very year this house changed hands, the census still places Mathias up in Hamilton County, not here on Main Street. And yet the record shows that in 1830, Mathias sold this house to Thomas Hare. So how does a man own a house in a town he doesn't live in? The likeliest answer is the simplest one. He held the title but not the keys. This was probably a property he owned rather than lived in, maybe a rental, maybe a place for the family to stay when Kugler business brought them into town. It fits everything we know about this family, who tended to buy Milford real estate in the father's name, while the son ran things on the ground. But whatever its exact story, one thing is easy to sort out. At more than 2 centuries old, this is one of the oldest buildings in all of Milford. On a bluff above the East Fork of the Little Miami, a stone house has kept its footing for more than 2 centuries. One of the oldest homes in the area. The house itself went up around 1810, raised by John Pollock, the first judge in Claremont County. At the time it was built, the Speaker of the Ohio House of Representatives. But it's another family's name that the house remembers, Gatch. Philip Gatch, one of the first American-born Methodist preachers, had inherited enslaved people through his wife's family back in Virginia, and he freed them. Then in 1799, he brought his children into the Northwest Territory for a single, deliberate reason, to raise them on soil where no person could be owned. He became a judge here, a surveyor, a man his neighbors trusted with their disputes and their land. And in 1802, when Ohio sat down to write its first constitution, they sent Philip Gatch to help write it, where he argued that black men should be allowed to vote, to hold office, to testify in a courtroom against a white man. He lost those votes, but he made those claims out loud, on the record, in 1802. His life was thought remarkable enough that years later his biography was written by a justice of the United States Supreme Court, John McLean, the same man who would one day write the Great Dissent on the Dred Scott case. Philip's own first home here was a cabin on a farm where in 1811 he buried his wife Elizabeth and opened the ground that became Green Lawn Cemetery. Philip himself still lies there, on land that would one day also receive a governor of Ohio in John Pattison. But his family went across the valley for 8 generations, and the finest of those houses they held was this stone one on the bluff. The Gatches are gone from it now. The land is a nature preserve. The 500-year-old bur oak that once shaded the front yard was finally brought down by a storm. But the stone house still stands atop its hill, standing witness to the family that crossed a wilderness to raise their children free. Mid-century brought suburbanization to Milford. The Milford Shopping Center opened on Lila Avenue in 1956, a town pivoting toward auto-era retail. And the rail era that built the place finally wound down. The last passenger train stopped serving Milford in 1948, and the once busy railroad station closed for good in 1969, as freight moved off the rails and onto trucks. In 1982, Milford officially became a city. Since then, I-275 has carried the suburban story forward, but layered over the historic core that's come roaring back in the last few decades. Up and down the old streets, new businesses have moved into the old bones. The town's turned out a few notable names, too. John M. Pattison, elected the 43rd governor of Ohio. I've got a whole standalone video on him, and it's a heck of a story. Hall of Fame pitcher Ipa Rixley, who's buried up in Green Lawn Cemetery. And one of the biggest stars on YouTube, Mark Fishback, better known as Markiplier, grew up right here and went to Milford High School. But these days, Milford leans hardest into being a trail and river town. It's the point where 4 major trails converge: the Little Miami Bike Trail, the American Discovery Trail, the Underground Railroad cycling route, and the Buckeye Trail. And back in October of 2012, Milford earned the distinction of becoming the very first designated Buckeye Trail town in the state, adding the canoe and kayak access and the local outfitters, and it's no wonder the town wears the trail and river name. Take a drive through Milford on a Saturday morning and you'll get the feel for how the town's doing, because you'll be hard-pressed to find a parking spot. Boutiques, antique, bookshop, restaurants running from hole-in-the-wall gyms to modern fashion-forward kitchens. It's become a place where people come back to weekend after weekend. Not bad for a town that started with a mill and a ford across the river. There's so much history here in Milford, I could come back and do 10 more videos, but I'll leave it where we're at for now. So what other history or stories would you add? Let me know in the comments below so we can all learn together. Until next time, see you in the town.